it's our 7th year in a row being listed in that publication. So we've got a deep commitment to being sustainable. We've been doing that for a long time. We are one of the 569 schools nationwide that have signed on to Second Nature's climate commitment. It's a presidential level commitment that says that we're going to be cutting our greenhouse gases by 80% by the year 2050. We recognize that climate change is real, it's happening now, and there are things that we can do about that, and we're trying to lead by example in our efforts so that others around us can also make those changes. We just saw the intergovernmental panel on climate change talking about the fact that rather than that 2 degrees Celsius increase that we maybe as a planet could sustain, it's really not 2, it's now 1.5. And that this is something that we have to be serious about, and we have to do that by 2030, not by 2020. Mattapoisett and as well as Fairhaven have the same bike share system. We launched this last fall, and inside of 5 weeks we had 11,000 rides on those, which pretty much knocked that out of the park. The company's thrilled, our students are delighted, and they're smiling as they're running around campus on these bikes, helping to get themselves places in a third less time. We've avoided 1.8 tons of greenhouse gas emissions as a result of that, because they didn't need to drive to campus or drive to class. So that's a huge improvement for us. One of the things that we realize in doing partnership programs like this with partners at Marion Institute, we've gone a long way back with Marion in terms of hosting the original Pioneers program here, something that we were thrilled to be able to do. If we look at the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, there are 22 Sustainable Development Goals that exist. Only 5 of them are specifically related to climate and to the environment. That means there are 17 of them that are about humans. It's about people. It's about us and how we get along with one another. Because we could have a healthy planet to live on, but if we don't get along with one another, this isn't going to work. And this program, I think, typifies that. It epitomizes that program in and of itself. So this is one of Marion Institute's greenhouse initiatives. It's a part of their Connector series, and there are other programs that they do throughout the year on this topic, on similar topics. So I really encourage those of you on their mailing list to look for those. If you're not already on their list, I'm sure that you can sign up for those over at the check-in table. So S.A.F.E is an organization that is a Arts for Social Change. It's a non-governmental organization registered in Kenya. Nick Reddy is their executive director. He'll be talking tonight about HIV, about feminine genital cutting, and he'll be announcing one of their new initiatives that I'm not going to announce because that's his job. But also in the preservation of culture for the Maasai people as well as others. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Nick and his team to give us the presentation for tonight.
Good. Hi. Thank you very much for coming. Some people have been dodging tornadoes to get here. My name is Nick Reddy, and I'm the founder.
There are new initiatives that I'm not going to announce because that's his job. But also in the preservation of culture for the Maasai people as well as others. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Nick and his team to give us the presentation for tonight.
Good. Hi. Thank you very much for coming. Some people have been dodging tornadoes to get here. My name is Nick Reddy, and I'm the founder and executive director of S.A.F.E.
My name is Amos Leuka. I'm the project manager, S.A.F.E. and co-founder, S.A.F.E.
So I'm just going to give you a little background of how it all began. In 2001, I was a successful actor living in Los Angeles, and I was introduced to a Kenyan pediatrician who was working at NYU Medical Center, and he specialized in pediatric HIV, and he wanted to go back to his hometown of Mombasa and establish a pediatric HIV unit in the public hospital there and try and offer some of the services that he was offering to mothers and children in New York to the mothers and children in his hometown. I was so inspired by what he was doing, I started doing voluntary work for him, acquiring equipment for the laboratory that he wanted to build. And I ended up going and spending 6 months in Mombasa, actually building the clinic. I mean, when you go from Hollywood to a public hospital in Africa, there are quite a few surprises. but the thing that really shocked me and angered me the most was the failure of public health education. I mean, this is 2001, so you are 20 years into the epidemic, 2 decades into the epidemic, and we would have one smart, intelligent woman after another coming into the clinic, and she would know nothing about the disease. No one had told her. So I was like, well, what's my profession doing? Theatre and education, we've all heard of theatre and education. And I started asking around, and people were like, yeah, I've seen little plays about AIDS. I said, well, let's do a big play. Let's find the best actors in Mombasa, which I started doing research, and I came across this incredible group of world-class actors who were working together, and some of whom we're still working with 17 years later. And we got Shafiq, the doctor, and other doctors from the hospital, and we devised the play, and we took it out to the communities in Mombasa, and the response was overwhelming. From chiefs, from clinicians and public health officers, from the heads of support groups and women's groups, they all were saying to us, where have you people been? You know, this is what we need the community to understand. And it wasn't rocket science. We just made a really good play with really good characters and a really good plot, and it was all performed by people who come from that community. And I think critically, we were funny. We made people laugh, and when you make people laugh, they like you, and they'll listen to what you have to say, particularly men, who are one of the hardest PA system, and start blasting music, and then we would go out with the Simbaropa, the lion drums, and we would go around dancing through the streets and literally drum up our audience and come back. And it provided a vocabulary for people to discuss something that they found taboo, something they found impossible to talk about before. And many families would come to us and say, you know, we sat down as a family for the first time and we talked about HIV. We would often go out with the mobile testing units from the local district hospitals, and we'd be heading to some village, and they go, we've been to this village. These people, they don't want to be tested. We were there for 3 days, we tested one person, and we'd do our performance. And on average, we'd test 130 people after every show. And as I'm sure you know, the sooner you get on treatment, if you have HIV, the better the drugs will work. So it was critical to give people this kind of courage. In 2004, based on the success of that, we replicated in the Nairobi slums. And once again, it was transformative for those communities. It created the right dialogue around a very difficult subject. And then in 2005, I was invited by an American photographer, in fact, who'd been working in the Loiter Hills, a very, very remote and undeveloped part of Kenya. And she said, you have to come with me because there's a ceremony happening that happens only once every 10 years.
As Nick said, developed part of Kenya, and most traditional. And it's the home to the Loiter Master, my home community. And the ceremony Nick talks about is called the Unupo ceremony, the graduation of warriors, aged morals, to becoming junior elders. The ceremony is the most important part of our lives. And it is attended by over 5,000 people from Kenya and Tanzania.
And you know, for me it was astonishing. I mean, the fact that this culture had remained intact into the 21st century. And as Amos said, there's 5,000 or 6,000 Maasai there, and we were 4 in our party, and we were 4 of maybe 10 visitors there. And we negotiated our presence with the elders when we arrived, and they said, okay, we're going to give you a school teacher who speaks very good English, and he'll look after you. And that was Amos. And he took me around for 3 days, just following the warriors while they went down to the river and painted themselves with chalk. We went to the sacred forest. I mean, it was just incredible. And on the 3rd night, we're sitting around the fire, and Amos started telling me about a youth group that he had formed.
The youth group that I had formed dealt with livestock management and agricultural production, and most importantly, HIV awareness in the community. At that time, there was no education on HIV. People either think it's a disease outside our community or just mine. So that's what the people think about the disease. And we have just started that group to ensure that it addressed all that. And that's when we made it.
And I told Amos nothing about what I did. So I told him about the work I was doing in Nairobi and Mombasa. I said, look, actually I run an HIV education organization. And I said, but we use theater. And I just don't know that it would be appropriate here in this very traditional culture to start bringing in a Western form of performance. I said, but your songs, they're, you know, all the singing you're doing. I said, could we take those songs and could we sort of adapt them to be about HIV, to be about HIV? And Amos was like, yeah, well then you understand. This is what our songs are traditionally for. They are a means of passing information to our community. And we were like, aha.
6 women, and we go around talking about HIV. And we give the facts and myth. And even taught the people to wear the condom, their shield. We call Injoho and
Elongo, which was wear your shield. Maasai love their shield. And it was a very effective, in the end, it was a very, very effective means of health education. But when we started, the condoms would come out and people would literally scream and run away. I mean, they were horrified, and actually some people were really, really angry about it. They were like, you cannot show condoms to a group of men and women. And I think I would have backed off at that point, thinking, okay. But Amos and Sarah, his counterpart, the other project manager, were like, no, our community must understand this. And it was very, very fast, the change, because quite quickly we realized we were going to have to set up a condom distribution network. And to get the condoms into the community, because they weren't, the government dispensaries just didn't have them. And so we actually set up a network of the guys would go around with rucksacks full of condoms and wooden penises, and they'd go from house to house, showing people how to use them and distributing them.
After 3 years of working with HIV program, my fellow project manager, Sarah Tanui, she's there, who is not with us today because she's on maternity leave, took us in a new direction. One morning, when we were working, we heard a scream of a girl being circumcised at home. Hearing that, Sarah was not able to do her work. She was so distressed. And when I asked her why, she told me, Amos, it's because you don't know what that girl is going through. You could have not been able to work too. Then
Want my daughter to go through what I went through. The Maasai practice type 2 circumcision, which is the removal of the clitoris, the labia minora and the labia majora, and they cut down to the bone. And the resulting wound is so severe that the girl has her leg tied to the roof of the hut for 2 to 3 weeks while the wound heals. I know, and so, I mean, and this is what I do want to say, brutal as it is a cultural norm, and it is the way that you become a woman. If a girl is not circumcised, she is not considered a woman. She is denied eligibility for marriage, and she is denied access to all aspects of Maasai ceremony and culture. And it's a very, very traditional community we're talking about, where your whole life is about ceremony and culture.
But of course, when we discussed that with him, we discussed and I told him that this is a difficult subject to address. It is more difficult than addressing HIV. But we have to discuss that. We have to share that with the community. And it is at our group. And what we have to do, we have to borrow permission from the Council of Elders, the authority in that community. Those are the people who have the authority. And anything that goes through them, you must go through them. Because if you have not gone through them, they might give you a problem.
They don't give us permission, we can't do it.
So that's when we have to get permission.
But luckily, Amos had been invited, even as a very young man, to become part of the Council of Elders because of the success of our work on HIV. So Amos would bring it up at meetings and say, and they go, Amos, why are you bringing this up? This is a woman's issue. You know, and of course, they're all men, the Council of Elders. Why are you bringing this up? And Amos would say, because we want to talk about it in public. And Amos would bravely bring it up as the youngest member of the Council of Elders every meeting for 2 years. And finally,
They say yes. If anything goes down and something went wrong, it is nothing to do with them.
so
But we are getting permission.
performance where there were a group of men and women singing in favour of FGM and a group of men and women singing against FGM. And of course they had the best song and the most charismatic performers. And they would keep interrupting each other, grabbing the microphone. And then a few people would go change sides. And then at the end, the message was, well, let's just discuss this. Let's just talk about it. And it's very important when you're dealing with this that you don't go in telling people what to do. So it was a culturally appropriate way of discussing it. It was respectful and it was non-judgmental. This is a really great thing that's happened recently, is that everyone now has these 4G mobile phones and they record all the shows. So we actually have a much larger spread. I've lost my thread now. Yeah, so that's you, Amos.
This performance, the one which you have just shown, what these people have seen, opened the door for discussion. And this one gives us room to recruit people for workshop, the elder men, the Morans, the warriors, elder women, and even able to attend school groups. We have also include circumcisers themselves in our workshop. With them, we are able to create an alternative rite of passage. This alternative rite of passage addresses all the elements of a traditional ceremony, but instead with no cuts. The cut is replaced with cleansing from the cow. And as cows in our community, they are sacred. And cleansing the girl in the morning with the cow's milk instead of cut is so powerful in our community.
In 2010, when we started this, 100% of girls were undergoing the type 2 cut that we just described. The last couple of years, we've had every year 30% of girls, more than 30%, are now going through the alternate rite of passage and receiving no cut. 60% have transitioned to a much lesser cut, which is still, it's not okay, but it is, as Sarah Tenoy says to me, Nick, it's better, but it's not okay. But only 10% of girls, and they're usually the ones who live in the most remote parts of the Loiter Hills, are undergoing that brutal cut. I mean, it's a massive achievement for Amos and the team. And of course we need full abandonment, and we need to stop the cut. And the great news is that as of 3 months ago, we brought together all the cultural leaders, and they have agreed that on February the 6th next year, they're going to make a declaration of abandonment and push to stop it completely in the Loiter Hills. They've also took the opportunity. It was the first time all 42 cultural leaders had been together for over 20 years, and they were in our office, and they took the opportunity to say, well, while we're here, we must bless the alternate rite of passage, which they did.
It was blessed.
It was blessed. They're going to do it again on February the 6th publicly. So
A new fast growing threat, the destruction of our forest, the forest of the lost state. Our community, our pastoralists, they are living a lifestyle of nomads where they move and they cannot settle in one place for a long time. But with population increase and change of lifestyle, people are clearing the forest for new settlements. And this is bringing a lot of distraction to the forest. And we want now, looking forward, but a new day.
and it's combined with a lot of logging, illegal logging for the timber trade. And of course, with population growth, you have a vast increase in livestock numbers. And you have one man with 400 goats or sheep traveling through. It's unsustainable, and something has got to be done. And it's really make or break for the community now. And so something has to be done very, very quickly, because without the forest, life is not sustainable in those hills. So Amos and I were both inspired by, I don't know if you are familiar with E.O. Wilson, the biologist, and his passion about biodiversity, and his latest book was called Half Earth. And his theory is that we can do whatever we like on half the planet, but we've got to leave the other half alone and leave it for nature. And I think it inspired both of us to come up with an idea for saving half of the remaining Oita forest.
As Nick said, the idea come out of that, and nothing done, that forest will disappear in my life. And the idea will come with, we create a cultural reserve. Maasai life is perfected in ceremony, and if the forest disappear, there will be no such places to perform those cultural ceremonies. So the idea of the cultural reserve will help in conserving that and make the people understand. Because my community is hard to understand conservation. But when combined with the preservation of the culture, they will understand the meaning and the importance of conservation.
So
And with that, I believe that's the way we can best save our forests.
So the reserve, everyone would have access to the reserve, but there would be no cutting, and there would be no livestock, which means that the forest would have a chance to regenerate. And I mean, you can see it. It's a truly incredible place, and we would police it by employing more of the Morans, the warriors who you saw, because there is a problem with delinquency now with these boys, because they traditionally they would be doing lion hunting or cattle rustling or protecting the village. Well, there's not so much need to protect the village. If they go out and kill lions, there'll be none left at all. And cattle rustling has become a much more dangerous occupation because of the amount of assault weaponry there is in Kenya. You don't want to go and steal somebody's cows when he's got an AK-47. So it would be a way of providing employment to them. And they're also that age set, they're very private. They traditionally always lived deep in the forest. You're not allowed to see them eat. It's seen in very bad form, especially for women, to see them eating. It's a private time for them. And the forest will provide them with the kind of secrecy and a much more dangerous occupation because of the amount of assault weaponry there is in Kenya. You don't want to go and steal somebody's cows when he's got an AK-47. So it would be a way of providing employment to them. And they're also that age set, they're very private. They traditionally always lived deep in the forest. You're not allowed to see them eat. It's seen in very bad form, especially for women, to see the meeting. It's a private time for them, and the forest will provide them with the kind of secrecy and environment that they need so badly.
And critically, the Loita is an essential corridor for wildlife. We just, in Loita, we have a salty which is in the middle of the edge of the forest. And that's where the elephant take their route from the famous Masai Mara, Amboseli, and the Serengeti Plain. And when that one, when the conservation, the cultural reserve is met, it will provide the route for those elephants and also prevent human-wildlife conflict.
I mean, there's a lot of debate worldwide about lands like this. It was your introduction touched on it very, very powerfully. Most of the land that we as a species have to save is in the hands of communities like Amos's. And there's not been an attempt to do something like this in Kenya. After we came up with the idea, we have discovered, in fact, there are programs running like this which have been effective mostly in Central and South America. And a 2014 report by World Resources said that when communities have control of the land, the logging reduces massively. In Bolivian Amazon, it's 6 times lower. In the Brazilian Amazon, it's 11 times lower. In Guatemala, it's 20 times lower. And in the Mexican Yucatan, where they have a huge population, it's 350 times lower. So we are desperate to pioneer the first East African cultural reserve because we have to do it. This is something that affects us all now, and we have to find the way to make this work.
And they are divided into sections. So this can be replicated to all the Maasai tribe, and it can be easily replicated because they share similarity, most of the similarity, language, and lands. So a lot is shared.
An example, Amos just mentioned S.A.F.E Samburu. S.A.F.E Samburu, the Samburu tribe are very close to the Loita Maasai. The language is very close. If a Maasai and a Samburu are talking to each other, they can say, sorry, what did you mean? And what I mean is, da, 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 and they'll understand, oh, okay, I get you. So it's a very close culture. And the S.A.F.E Ma were invited to go to Samburu to perform there by one of the safari companies. In fact, Saba was one of the instigators of this. And a group of Samburu went, we want to do it. They were totally inspired. And I was like, I can't take on another team, I can't do another group. And actually they worked for 2 years as volunteers till I finally went, okay, you guys are serious. And we've taken them on now for the past 3 years. And we have now S.A.F.E Samburu. But it's a direct result of being inspired by, so I think, yes, it's the answer to your question. I think it absolutely can replicate. And one of the things I've learned, I mean, I knew it before I went, and I grew up in multicultural London. People are people are people. And there are differences, and there are sensitivities and things you have to understand. But in the end, we are one species. And we have an ability to understand each other and communicate extremely well. So I think the potential of this to ripple out is enormous.